what we're seeing now is that it's freeing people up to do other work, to get more work done, and to do other work than they were doing before. That's the biggest pothole. We've got this incredible opportunity, but people don't know how to embrace it, and they don't know how to apply it in a way that is effective for their business, so they dabble. The truth is that it's not training the way we've always historically thought of training. This is not a technical exercise. This is a technique exercise.
Hello and welcome. I'm your host, Sam Knowles. And joining us today is Julie Holmes, a UK-based, American-born AI evangelist who describes herself as your friendly neighborhood nerd. A strategist, innovator, and entrepreneur in all things artificial intelligence, Julie has a track record of high-profile jobs in the software and systems management sector. Before striking out on her own, Julie held a series of roles ranging from strategy to product marketing, from companies as diverse as Oracle and Genius Sports. For the past 9 or so years, Julie has focused on helping industry associations, sales professionals, and leaders to make smarter use of technology. In recent years, she's zeroed in on artificial intelligence, leveraging her expertise in AI and emerging technologies to unlock transformative growth. Julie has an international reputation, it's fair to say, as an inspirational keynote speaker. A fellow of both the National Speakers Association in the US and the Professional Speaking Association in the UK, Julie's latest creation is her Stage Hopper app, designed to help her fellow professional speakers get more and better paid speaker gigs. I'm sure we'll come back to that. And Julie's keen to share the love too. In her regular newsletter, AI Prompts Weekly, Julie provides power prompts for large language models to, as she says, help you work smarter, not harder. To date, Julie's generously provided hundreds of prompts in dozens of categories, from summarize a business book and apply it to your challenge to create a data breach response plan via create a sequence of 5 follow-up emails for new leads. A real treasure trove there. Tech and data savvy, Julie prides herself on her plain-speaking, jargon-free approach that makes AI accessible and so inspires leaders to take action. I'd say that makes her pretty much a perfect guest for this podcast. It's great to have you with us here today, Julie. Welcome to Data Malarkey.
Thank you so much, Sam. That was an amazing introduction. And I'm excited that you actually read my newsletter. And that's wonderful. Way to dive into the data.
Well, perfect. I mean, listen, when it pops into the inbox, I can't remember which day of the week. Is it Wednesday? I can't remember which day it comes. Anyway, whenever it comes, I think, I really should be using AI for this. There was one indeed that when I was actually in the process of briefing the writing of some social media posts, and it says, "Here's 5 ways to write." So that was a recent one. I trust it was a decent summary of who you are and what you do. Is there anything that you'd like to add? Anything that I've got wrong?
I don't know. I think that was a really great summary. I think the only other thing that I would add is that, a lot of people ask, how I first kind of got involved with AI. And I was very fortunate to have a chance to actually work in an AI startup, in an AI-based startup for a couple of years. And, right at the very kind of earlier days of AI, being more ubiquitous and more kind of out in the world. And that was a kind of a great experience because we weren't specifically looking at large language models. This was actually a computer vision startup. And so it was great to kind of see the power of AI do things beyond just, I can write a sentence.
Perfect. Well, listen, we will spend, I think, a good deal of our time talking about AI and how you help to demystify it for leaders and businesses. But before we talk about AI, which has been a dominant theme of this season, unsurprisingly, of Data Malarkey, and before we talk about data, I want to start with a question that's designed to get to the heart of what makes you, you. And it doesn't necessarily ask you to tell us about the day job. So tell me, if you would, Julie, how do you spend your time?
Well, I spend my time in 2 primary ways. One, I'm a builder. I love to build. And so that could be building prototypes for apps or devices. I've actually got a shoebox of prototypes that I've created. Everything, if it involves duct tape or, a glue gun, I'm in. I love to build things. And sometimes that's building products. Sometimes that's building workflows. Sometimes that's building databases, but I just like to create. I think it's great. The second thing that makes me who I am is, man, I love my dogs. Oh, we could talk about dogs. We could do this whole podcast about dogs, but I love dogs and I love the science of dogs and I love understanding the way they think and I love training my dogs and we do a lot of tricks. They do tricks. I suppose technically I do tricks as well, but really it's them doing the tricks if I can get it all right. And so that's, I love to kind of like be engaged and involved and just do things that didn't exist before.
Very good. My medium, I'm not particularly artistic. I come from a long family of artists and craftspeople. People grew up. I went the data route because everybody had taken glass engraving and mosaics and painting. But my medium is cardboard. My son, who's now in his early 20s, and I used to spend all of our time building three-dimensional structures out of cardboard. So I'm completely with you. Now, listen, you mentioned that you worked in this AI startup, and if we were to believe the popular media, AI was invented, or at least unleashed on the world in November 2022 with the mass release of ChatGPT. Can you tell us about your journey from, including that startup that you mentioned at the beginning? But I know that it's more than a couple of years in the making. Tell us about how you got to where you are now as this AI evangelist.
Yeah, I think when we think about the history of AI, and it's such an interesting conversation about what do we actually classify as AI? We could go as far back as to say, there was AI 40 years ago or 50 years ago. There was forms of this artificial intelligence of technology that could think and function and operate as a human would. Because that's really fundamentally what we're saying when we talk about AI. It's a technology that can think and operate in a human-like manner. That's what it is. So everything from a calculator to a computer to what we know today as LLMs and the ChatGPTs and the Claudes of the world. So for me, that whole process has always been about, building software applications or diving into business processes and figuring out how to streamline those processes, how to develop them, how to automate them, how to connect them up in a way that freed up people to do different, more valuable work. And in many instances, that same technology found a way to give people insights that they didn't have in any other way. Like, for example, what we were doing with the computer vision startup was really about using video and cameras to interpret what was happening somewhere. So all well and good if you're at a restaurant and you're stood there with a clipboard and you're going to count how many people come in and you're going to, set a stopwatch every time they step up to the counter and every time they talk to somebody, you're going to do a stopwatch and you're going to, see how long the table stays dirty at the restaurant and all of that. Like all well and good if you've just got people to stand around and capture that data, but not so great if you don't. So the idea of being able to increase and improve and value the data, and to turn that data into actionable insights in new ways is always what's gotten me excited about AI, because data drives decisions, right? In the best of worlds, data drives decisions. So, that has been kind of that journey of being able to work with big, enterprise companies, the Oracles and the JD Edwards and the PeopleSofts of this world, to working with startups who are around analytics and being able to better understand and proactively notify people about issues rather than having them go and look for issues, all the way to now and today, where we're talking about how can AI, automate workflows and, creating agents and all of that technology. So my journey has been quite varied, but a huge part of it has always been on business understanding and connecting technology to actual use cases.
I was at I think it's a brilliant application of your skills and your interests. The evening before we're recording this, I was at an event in central London that was all about the impact of AI on the PR and communications business. It's a niche and a business that I've been involved with, and there were journalists there, and a former winner of Love Island, who's also a teacher and now a social media influencer, and there were lawyers and people from big enterprise software companies, all sorts of different people. Everyone was using AI in really resourceful and interesting and powerful and analytical ways. Nobody on the panels, in the fireside chats, in the audience said that they had more time than when they started using, when they managed to out-automate stuff. Do you find that are you able in your own life or in the work that you do with those that you advise to give people some time back, or does it just free them up to do the more cerebral, heavier lifting things?
Oh, do you know, it's funny. That is such a great observation. Mostly because even as I look at my own work, you're absolutely right. That's such an incredible observation. Basically, yes, I've automated things. Yes, I can do things more quickly. What it actually means is that I get more done. But it's never really like, I never finished a day with like, well, that's it. I've got everything on my to-do list done. That I'm done. In fact, you know what? I'm so done. I'm going to leave early. I think that there are probably some roles that have that in their lives. I don't know. I've never had that job, but I think it would be amazing if I did. Um, I, but I've never been in that position. So I would say that what we're seeing now is that it's freeing people up to do other work, to get more work done, and to do other work than they were doing before.
And potentially, I guess, to realize their potential without ideally leading to burnout. I mean, I as a somebody who spent about 4 or 5 years studying and researching in psychology, I know that most of the popular psychological studies that are cited are miscited. The Morabian 7% of communication is verbal. It's a complete mangling of the original paper. There's another paper, I can't remember the authors of it, but the human brain is only ever 20% active, and that maybe AI is allowing. But I do get a sense of people. As technology has always done, allowing us to do things that are less mundane, cleansing data sheets and actually getting to genuine insight from those data sheets rather than having to say, oh, we've got 17 different ways of representing our customers here. I must remember that. Actually, AI can just get that done. But, well, I'm relieved that if an AI evangelist like you doesn't feel that they have more time, that we're not alone. We're not alone. Now, there's clearly a huge amount of noise around AI right now. There are side orders of fear of missing out and anxiety and the statistically illogical belief that everybody must be ahead of me and a sense that the boat is being missed and that, my job, if not my whole profession, is going to go. Could you mop our collective fevered brows a little, Julie, and tell us where you think both the biggest opportunities as well as the biggest potholes lie for AI in business today?
For sure. I think, there's a lot, especially when you mention the media. I think that's a great example. The media thrives on creating this fear of missing out, and they thrive on creating anxiety. Good news doesn't sell. They love drama and they love to present it. And while this is an incredible time and there's a lot happening, it's probably not as dramatic as the media makes it out to be. And certainly most people, as is true most of the time with things that are covered by the media, just get on with their day. In terms of the biggest opportunity, I think a lot of the biggest opportunities with AI come from automation and from, kind of eliminating mundane tasks that really drain creative and energy. I mean, there are a list of things every day that you are forced to do, that we're all forced to do as part of our jobs, sometimes even as part of our personal life, where we think, I'm going to do it. I'm not going to do a great job of it. I have to get it done. I'm not going to do a great job, but you know what? It just has to be done. And this is an opportunity to kind of offload a lot of those tasks that we're not going to do great. They aren't in our wheelhouse. This isn't what I'm awesome at. And in fact, even things that we are really awesome at that just take us a really long time can be really expedited. Like, for example, I am actually a great writer. I'm really good at writing. I studied communication. I have a master's degree in communication. I love rhetoric. The whole science of communication, brilliant. I am slow, so slow, Sam, when it comes to writing, because I think and I overthink and I try to get the words just right. And so now I can draft something, have AI take a second pass at it, go back and edit it in a tenth of the time that it would have taken me to write it from scratch. So the ability for us to be able to speed things up and to be able to kind of, offload those mundane tasks and also to be able to scale. So there's a lot of tasks that we have that we know we should do, but we don't do because we don't have the time, or it feels like it would take too much energy, or frankly, the value isn't there at that individual level. Like take, for example, you've got to send a bunch of outreach emails because you're in sales. and you have to write a bunch of outreach emails to potential prospects. Well, you know that you should be out there doing research on every one of those prospects. And then you should be analyzing that research. And then you should be drafting emails that are really nuanced and really personalized and really invested in that relationship. But you also know that you have to do 100 of them. You're not going to be able to invest that kind of time, but AI can do a huge portion of that. I actually was building an AI agent yesterday that, goes out and analyzes a company, analyzes a contact, looks at their Google News, brings back, summarizes all of it. It synthesizes all of that data, comes back, and it drafts an email message that is incredibly tailored and personalized to what's happening in their business and how a service can impact that business and add value. Again, 100 of those generated in minutes, something we could never do individually as people. So that's like the opportunities, is scaling, personalization, automation, all of that. In terms of the potholes, I think the biggest risk that people have is that they dabble but don't get good at it. So we have what's called an AI readiness assessment, and people who see me speak around the world, things like that, all kind of take this readiness assessment or are invited to take this readiness assessment. And it's really interesting to me, the disparity between what we hear in general summaries about, how many people are using AI, but then you take that to the next level and how many people are using it well. So we'll have like 98% of leaders will tell, say on the AI readiness assessment, they say, yes, I believe that AI will have a significant or noticeable impact on my industry. Fewer than, well, in fact, probably, I think right now the number sits somewhere at around 70 to 80% of those same leaders would say that their organization provides little to no training on AI for their staff. So again, massive impact on the industry. We're not preparing anybody for it. Only 14% of people believe that they are equipped to use this technology effectively. And while I might go into an audience of 1,000 people and say, who's using AI? And it'll be 60 to 70% will raise their hand. Yep, I'm using ChatGPT, I'm using Claude, I'm using Grok, whatever it is. And then you'll say, great, how many of you think you are using it really well and you're getting great results and you know exactly what you're doing? And it'll be crickets. There'll be tumbleweed that rolls in front of the desk. It's just, that's the biggest pothole. We've got this incredible opportunity, but people don't know how to embrace it. And they don't know how to apply it in a way that is effective for their business. So they dabble. And a lot of times they dabble and then they get disappointed because doing something half-assed is never going to get you full-assed results.
I think that's absolutely fascinating. Your mention of Grok, as we know, the head of the Department of Government Efficiency in the US is the owner, the kind of founder. I was amused at this event I was at last night when somebody said, does anyone have Grok here? And about half people had Grok on their phones. And they said, just ask Grok who is the biggest spreader of misinformation or disinformation. And the answer comes up routinely as Elon Musk, which I thought was interesting that his own product labels him. Maybe it's a badge of pride. I'm really, really interested in your talking about kind of the automation, systemization, doing things absolutely at scale. I'm absolutely completely with you, and that's where I think in our little business and in the very big businesses that we work with and advise, that's where we're beginning to see real traction happening. As a case in point, big global pharma businesses that invest huge amounts in many different forms of insight generation, be it primary market research or social media listening or patient advisory boards, and they get presented to them by the research agency or by the specialist agency or by the dashboard, and then they get digitally filed and then they get put away and never looked at again. Now, beginning to wrap AI layers around that and being able to interrogate and say, what can you see here? And you also see here, which is so labor intensive for so many people. And you're advocating also in the realms of creativity, in taking your thought starters and expanding them. where do you stand on AI being able to replace human creativity? I know a lot in the arts, in music, in literature, in filmmaking, are anxious and running campaigns that do takeovers of all media in particular countries. Where do you stand? Do you think that it's only a matter of time before the next Pixar movie is made entirely without human intervention, or do you think that there's still that role for the human sort of taking of old and making something new and genuinely insightful?
So I'm going to caveat everything I'm about to say with this is not my area of expertise. So I don't focus on the creative realm of things like, artistic generation, all of that. But let me tell you how I at least see it in my world and how I think there is a perspective for all of us to have and at least to consider, which is that if you were to go back to the very beginning of Walt Disney, to when there was a room full of men who were in full suits and who were sketching, individual cells of a character, of a cartoon that they were going to get assembled, and they were individually coloring them in, or penciling them in. And if you were to say to them, even 10 years ago, here's how we've made a Pixar film, they would be appalled. They would be mortified, and they would claim that it was the end of all creativity as we know it. So here is my belief that we are an evolving society and that we are always evolving. And while it is difficult sometimes to evolve, and it is tricky sometimes to evolve, and sometimes painful to evolve, that we as humans are the most capable species when it comes to adjusting and embracing change and moving forward and thriving in new environments and new scenarios. So what's different this time than has happened in the past is that this time things are happening faster. So we've never seen it happen at the scale and at the speed that we're seeing it right now. But this isn't the first time we've seen technological advancements that kind of blow people's minds. I mean, imagine for a second when the calculator was released. I mean, that was craziness, right? To think that you could actually just press buttons on a phone and it would just, or not a phone, on a calculator, you would press buttons and it would do this incredibly complex mathematical computation, was unbelievable. So when we think about the creative piece of it, I think that people will learn to operate with this technology and to embrace it and to partner with it in new ways that we have never anticipated. And I think that while, yes, it is painful, and you know what, I am also sad about the way that it will ultimately impact some of the creative industries, because I have people in those industries and and I love movies and I love storytelling and I love all of this. I don't think that it replaces the creative element of it as much as it hopefully will augment it. It will give us new ways to tell stories. It will give us new ways to get stories to people faster. The ability for a movie maker who's a brand new movie maker and has an idea for a film, who doesn't have $1 million or $20 million or $1 billion to create it, could suddenly create something that is really compelling. Like the equality that can create could be really interesting. Now, is it going to be perfect? No. Is it going to be, are we going to have some teething pains along the way? For sure. But I think if we look ahead 20 years, 50 years, this is just a blip in the radar in the change and in the transformation that happens over time with any technology.
Yeah, I'm with you. And I mean, if you think that it is not it isn't unknown for young movie makers to shoot entire movies on smartphones these days. Indeed, the record-breaking Oscar-winning director writer of Anora that swept the boards at the Academy Awards this year. One used to be a wedding videographer, but two made a movie cinematic release shot on an iPhone. So that point about democratizing, I think is really very, very well made. There's a guy at New York University, a guy called Colm O'Shea. He writes about writing, and the reason I bring him up is because he's talked a lot about how brilliant many of contemporary large language models are at convergent thinking, of looking at everything we know and boiling it down and averaging it out, not necessarily serving it up as bland, but I was for example, I was shown the other day Coral AI that allows you to do a meta-analysis of academic papers in a second. What do we know about diabetes in pregnancy? And you get the papers. You say, tell me what the papers are. Write me a meta-analysis, and I remember a friend of mine did a PhD in 30 years ago, 25 years ago, in fruit in Shakespeare. That could happen. You and I would have written something better this afternoon without even having thought about it. But one of the things that O'Shea talked, so really good at convergent thinking, not necessarily so good at divergent thinking, of that genuinely kind of human insightful thinking. The reason I mention all of this is that as large language models in particular are trained initially on human data, on the corpus of comedy or literature or whatever it might be, they're trained on that. And then they produce an AI answer created by LLMs that have been created by humans. Do you think that there's a possibility that as their learning corpus begins to be more and more stuff that they have created themselves? So it's depending on human content, but also AI content. Do you think that there's a possibility that within days, weeks, months, years, actually we might come to not recognize or not the responses may not be sort of sufficiently human. They may be a whole new form of creativity that takes us off in new ways. And indeed, have you seen evidence of AI generated responses being not human-like because they're developing their own ways of thinking?
I have not seen any evidence of that. And I think partly that's because there's not enough AI generated, kind of self-learning happening, right? So the idea that right now AI has been trained on what is essentially human content. And I think what I hear you saying is, what happens when AI starts to be training on AI generated content? And I think, the biggest risk of that, of course, is always that we start to lose that divergence. And we start to, it just becomes, more consistent, more staid, more, just bland, right? Just the same. We're just getting more and more of the same. It is ultimately a probability engine. When we think about all of the large language models, they function as probability engines. They're just giving us what the next most likely option is. And so, we get a lot of the same. And that is always one of the risks, is making sure that you're pushing the envelope and you're using it to support your creativity and to support your broad thinking, but not necessarily using it to replace your thinking. I think that I concede the point that there is a risk of that happening. I suspect a part of what will happen is that we will get smarter as we build LLMs in the future to say, we're not going to train ourselves on our own bias and on our own content. We're going to try and keep, looking for unique content, and we're going to try and keep looking for unique perspectives, and we're going to get better at culminating that and bringing it together. And so I think that there will become more filtering in the future. But I also think that the other piece of that is going to be that the way that we collaborate with it and its ability to understand what probable is gets a lot broader. That we start to get more varied answers because it's a combination of everything about who we are. The combinations are what make it really special, in my opinion. The LLM on its own, everybody could get exactly the same, not exactly, everybody could get very similar responses. It's when you start to combine together, here's information about me, here's information about this scenario, here's additional data that you don't have in your database. Now combine it with that LLM and add in, here's what I'm asking, the angle that I want you to take, and the way that I want you to put this information together. that combination is so many magnitude more of uniqueness that I think that we have the opportunity to continually create very unique perspectives if we give it the right parameters and prompts and injections that encourage it to always be unique and creative and collaborative. If we just rely and we ask for just the same answer that everybody else gets, that's what we'll get. So the onus falls on us, I think, as well, to be more challenging of AI, to ask it to do bigger things, to ask it to do more creative things, to ask it to work with us, not for us.
That's great. I'm really interested by your AI readiness assessment tool and also your assessment of the data that comes out of the back end of that. Hello there. It's your host, Sam here. Well, if you've been inspired by this conversation and want to find out what type of data storyteller you are, why not visit our scorecard at data-storytelling.scoreapp.com, complete 12 simple questions, and you'll instantly be served with a report telling you what type of data storyteller you are. Now, back to the action. I'd like to know a little more if you could tell us a bit more about how you work with businesses and business leaders to get them not only up to speed with the potential of AI, but actually get them to do exactly what you're just describing, really working together collaboratively. So how do you get someone who talks a good talk to actually empower her people, get their teams to actually use it? What's your spark that ignites them?
So when I work with organizations, I really try to get them to think holistically about AI. So rather than thinking about it as a tactical tool, which is all well and good, and yes, everybody does need a level of training, the truth is that it's not training the way we've always historically thought of training. I can teach somebody every button that's in ChatGPT in 5 minutes or less. This is not a technical exercise. This is a technique exercise, right? And it's all about thinking about how to work with this technology in new and different ways. So I have a framework that I call the upgrade framework, which is all about like, how do you upgrade your business? And the 7 elements of it are, 1, you have to understand the potential. So as a leader, for example, if you don't understand what AI is capable of, how will you encourage, guide, and, develop your teams and your organization to embrace that technology? So there's a level of awareness that's required. Part 2 is to prioritize the opportunities. You could use AI for a lot of stuff. We describe this as a general purpose technology. It's like electricity. If I was to give you electricity and you never had it before, and I said, great, how are you going to use electricity in your business? And you'd be like, well, I don't know. I could use it for this. And you go, yes, you could. What are we going to use it for first? Where are you going to get actual return on investment, actual value? Where are you going to be able to see a project to completion where you can see the results rather than just believe that you're going to get results? So it's about prioritization. Then it's G, which is about, go AI first. How do we make AI the first stop in our solution rather than something that we plug in later on? So the first question that we should ask is, well, how could AI, or really any technology, do X, Y, Z for us and help us get better? R is about reinforcing AI related skills. This is kind of one of my favorites. For everybody that thinks soft skills are dead, you're wrong. Soft skills have never been more important than they are right now. All of those soft skills that we have kind of devalued in education more recently in the last few decades, things like critical thinking, communication, that ability to be able to problem solve, grit and determination to be able to work through a problem all the way to its completion, even when it gets hard, and the willingness to back up and try again when it doesn't go the way we want it, that kind of grit and determination. All of those are soft skills that are really valuable when you work with AI. Then we get into accelerating with tech and tools. I mean, we're 5 letters in before we even get to the technology and start talking about specific tools. That's when you're choosing the right tools for the right challenge. We've got 1,000 tools that we can pick from. New AI tools are being released every day. We're seeing just this wash of different specialty tools. We've got to pick the right ones to do the job. Then you have to deploy it in stages, which is all about, making sure that we are systematically implementing AI and applying AI in the business in ways that make sense and that complement each other and that enable our organization and the people in our organization to embrace that change over time. And finally, we have to evolve continuously. And that is this art of staying open to the future. Again, we've never seen change at this scale or at this speed. So if we think that we can pick a system and that system is going to be what we use for the next 10 years, that's just not going to happen. So, we have to be constantly evolving, willing to learn, willing to try, and being open to things changing and being open to new information, which for some of us has been hard. So we have to learn to do a better job of it.
I have to say that is the I'm not being remotely falsely flattering. That is by far the best and least forced 7-stage acronym I think I've ever heard. It's beautifully thought through. Thank you very much for sharing that. Should companies, do you think, and leaders within companies, should they be worried about giving away their state secrets to their employees' careless use of LLMs and other AI tools?
Yes and no. So yes, people should be aware anytime that you use any online platform. Yes, there's always a risk. And, we make the assumption that this is a bigger risk than any other platform. And it's not necessarily a bigger risk. It's just a different risk. So, it's the same thing if I was to go online, any online tool and start putting in personal information. I wouldn't recommend that in any online tool. I certainly wouldn't recommend it in AI. The distinction is that there's this idea of AI training on your data. But again, if we remember that large language models are token based, and that basically means that it operates in tiny chunks, almost in essence operating at a word level or at a root level of a word. It's not memorizing huge swashes of your information to regurgitate them later to somebody else. That's not how it works. The way that it works is much more by looking at how your words combine and then understanding the texture and the nuance of that combination, and then looking at that compared to the other billions and trillions of information that it has at its disposal and other tokens to combine them all together. And the great thing is that most of these large language models have been quite responsible. If you're using really well-defined, well-controlled platforms, not fly-by-night platforms, right? As is always the case. If you're using kind of really strong commercial-based platforms, then they've got options in there for you to turn off training so that systems aren't being trained on your data. But that doesn't change the fact that you are sending data over the internet. And that's the same risk that you have anytime you send information over the internet to anywhere. Is it a secure server that you're sending it to? And for organizations who are really interested and really committed to that privacy and protection, the cool thing is that you can now take these large language models and this technology and you can set it up in silos. So I can create what is in essence a blocked and protected version of this large language model capability just for my organization. In fact, I'm working with a large bank in Europe right now, and that's essentially what they've done. They've got 50,000 users of Copilot on their own private instance of Copilot. And that's how, anybody would protect any of their key enterprise data and enterprise systems. It's what they have to do with AI. It's not any different.
I've been impressed by the speed with which I don't work particularly with law firms, but I have done a bit, and I was with a couple of very big UK city law firms recently, and I'm hugely impressed with the way, one, they've de-risked everything by doing exactly as you say, but two, how actually it's turning what, just between you and me, Julie, some people might say is a slightly dry profession into something very much more creative. And I don't mean kind of creative in terms of creative accountancy, but suddenly they're seeing potential, and it's really exciting to them. And I've heard similar things within finance and auditing and so on as well. Not that they're suddenly getting reckless, but that they're kind of unleashing their potential. But I guess in no small part because they're not having to write an individual deed of covenant from scratch again. They can do that, get the LLM to do that for them, and then they can see what it actually means. Now, a few years ago, people would have had no idea what writing a prompt for an LLM meant. And yet today, many businesses are actively recruiting for the role of, let's say, a senior prompt engineer. I mentioned up top that you have this really useful prompt library and you distribute well-written prompts with your AI Power Prompts Weekly, and I'll include a link to that in the show notes. Tell us about that service and tell us why you give your prompts away for free.
So I think when it comes to writing prompts, it's an art as much as a science. And so it comes back to those soft skills that we talked about earlier and our ability to reason and create. So I often describe working with any of these tools as working with an intern. So I think it's we call it, you call it artificial intelligence, I call it artificial intern. It's like if you just reframe that and you think this is an intern and not really something that's truly intelligent, it will change the way that you engage with it and interact with it, the way you talk to it, what you tell it, everything. So, as I worked with organizations more and more, what I found was that I would say okay, show me your prompt for that. We get terrible results. We just, does a terrible job. I don't know anybody could trust ChatGPT to return anything. And I'll say, well, show me your prompt. And it'll be like, write an email to Bob that says, no thanks. And that's the extent. And I thought, so if you were going to give an intern instructions to write this email for you, and let's just assume for a second they were just drafting the email, like you weren't actually going to have them send it. They were just going to draft it. Is that what you would tell them? Well, no, I wouldn't. Well, what else would you tell them? Well, I would tell them who Bob is. I would maybe give them an example of other emails where I've said I'm not interested in this product or service. I would, probably explain that I want the email to contain these elements. Or I would tell it that, tell this intern that they should really go research what a great, declining email looks like. So they, as soon as you give them a different frame of reference and you start to demonstrate what really good instructions looks like, then I think people can build a lot from that. They can learn a lot from that. And ultimately, the goal is not because I think prompts are worth a lot of money. I don't think prompts are worth a lot of money. I think what they can do is they can really spur creativity. And that's the feedback that I love getting about the prompts newsletter I have on LinkedIn. I share a prompt in my weekly newsletter along with other content. And the prompts that are available in the library on my website, all of those are all there to get people to go, gosh, I never thought about using it for that. Or I thought about using it for that, but I just wasn't getting great response. Oh, I see now. I need to tell it to give me 10 examples, or I need to tell it that I don't want this, or I do want that. And so getting people to see what really good looks like means that they can do much better, which means that they can embrace AI, which means they can sell smarter, serve better, and save time. Pretty exciting.
The holy trifecta of that we have there, absolutely. Let's as we sort of head towards wrapping up. I've got a few more questions. Can you give us a list of kind of moral and ethical considerations that you think businesses and business leaders need to bear in mind when they start working in earnest with AI?
The first moral, or let's call it moral, quandary or opportunity that I think that leaders especially need to take. Everybody, actually, it's not really just leaders. Anybody who uses these technologies, we've already established that these are probability engines. And that means that they are looking at what's already there and then coming up with more of the same. So the problem with that is that there is an incredible amount of inherent bias. The internet is biased. It's biased geographically. It's biased authorship. It's biased perspective. History is written by the winners. So, it creates a potentially very biased output. It is on us as people, one, to make sure that we are challenging that bias and that we are aware of it more so than ever, and that we are constantly reviewing that content to make sure that we are serving the people that we want to serve in the best way that we can. That's one. The second area is that it requires a level of honesty and integrity that we maybe haven't been forced to push forward in the past. And that is, if I create something with AI, if I, respond to an employee candidate, if I use AI to evaluate applications and CVs for a job, I have to be willing to, one, be clear about that. And two, I have to be willing to dig into that process and make sure that I don't just offload that to a tool and hope for the best. We have an ethical responsibility and a moral obligation, in my opinion, to truly understand what these platforms are doing, how they operate, and that we agree and concur that that's what we would want it to do. We can't just assume that it's going to do something that we agree with and be okay with that. They're platforms. They have no feelings. They have no guilt. They have no obligation. So we have to deliver all of that. And I think the way that we summarize all of that is that it's never been more important to be human in the world of technology. We have to provide all the humanness and to balance out all of the technology. For every bit of technology that you put into your organization, you need to up your level of humanity that much. And that means that you have to show more patience with people. You have to show more compassion for people. You have to show more openness and inclusivity and equality. And, we have to be willing to drag technology with us to serve people in the best possible way and to be proud of what we're building. That is the big challenge. Be more human in the age of technology.
Perfect. Now, is there anything that I haven't asked you? We might call this a Columbo question. Just one more thing. Is there anything that I haven't asked you about the way that you work with data and the way you work with AI and with leaders that you think I should have asked you?
I don't know that there's anything that you should have asked me. Probably what I think is like a good resounding overall message. I hear a lot of organizations say, we don't have the budget for AI. We don't have, we just can't bring another technology platform in. People are overwhelmed with technology. I'm not a tech person. We hear all of those phrases over and over again. And I think that this is all about mindset. This is all about being open to the opportunity and being excited about the opportunity. And yes, being careful with it. But, you wouldn't want to go back to a time before cars. And, yes, their cars can be very dangerous. They absolutely can. People die in car accidents all the time. Bad things happen in cars, even that aren't even related to cars. But we could attach a lot of challenges to automobiles. But it's also what's enabled people to get to the hospital in time. It's also what enabled people to meet somebody that they've spent the rest of their lives with that they would have never met if it had just been distance keeping them apart. It's also where people have, sung out loud to their favorite songs and created a lifetime of memories, singing along to, Bon Jovi's Slippery When Wet album, just me maybe. But, that is, there is positive as well as challenges. We have to find the positive and we have to embrace that.
Perfect. We have a message to end on there, the potential and the opportunity. And finally, Julie, where can our listeners and our viewers find out about you and your work and what you're up to online and social media?
For sure. People can find me at julieholmes.com.
Perfect. We will include a link to that in the show notes. I will include a link to your AI readiness assessment and your LinkedIn profile and your Power Prompts weekly newsletter. Thank you so much for your time today, Julie.
It was my pleasure.
there was definitely pleasure on both sides, but I'm glad you've enjoyed it. If only there were more people with your approach to using data smarter, particularly in the world of AI, there'd be rather less malarkey around and rather more data-driven common sense. Julie Holmes, AI evangelist, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Sam.
Thanks so much for listening to Data Malarkey. To find out what kind of data storyteller you are, why not take our data storytelling scorecard? It takes just 2 minutes to complete and will give you a personalized report right away. Visit data-storytelling.scoreapp.com or follow the link in the show notes.